Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I've got Greg Lyle back with us tonight. He was with us 2 weeks ago and told us where the federal campaign was at that time, where the leaders were, where the parties were. We had some interesting conversations about demographics and people across different regions in the country. And now, with less than a week to go before election night, thought I'd have Greg Lyle, the founder and president of the Innovative Research Group, back to tell us about his most recent poll results, which he was just tabulating last night. So, Greg, welcome to the show.
Thank you. We're actually still tabulating, but I have a general sense of what we're seeing.
So, what's the general sense? What are we seeing?
A much tighter race.
Really?
And it's even possible that the conservatives could end up at the end of the day even with the liberals. We did three different polls, one that was mostly last Tuesday and Wednesday, one that was mostly last Thursday night with a little bit over the weekend, and one that's actually still in field tonight, but where we've seen the first 1,000 responses. And the first poll had the Liberals 3 points ahead. Second poll had the Tories 4 points ahead. And then the most recent poll has the Liberals slightly ahead of the Tory, but again, with a few more interviews to be done tonight. So then we'll see where we end up. When you look at that, even where the Tories are a couple points ahead, it's not enough for the Tories to win more seats than the Liberals. So you recall in the last two elections, the Conservatives won the popular vote over the Liberals in both elections by about a point. But in terms of seats, in both elections, the Liberals won more than 30 seats more than the Conservatives did. And that's because of something that we call voter efficiency. And that just means that the Tories tend to run up, the Conservatives tend to run up big wins, and the Liberals tend to win more closely.
So that the Tories are winning a lot of prairie seats and rural seats in Ontario with very little Liberal vote. But then in the 905, the Liberals are winning by a point or two and carry the seat.
Sure, it's not just 905. There are a lot of conservative liberal swing seats outside the 905. And, if you think about, for instance, the Kitchener area or some of the London seats or the suburbs of Windsor, those are all seats that can be quite close. And you see, a scattering in prairie urban centers. So, there's a seat or two in downtown Calgary that can go liberal. There's a chunk of seats in Winnipeg that go liberal, but sometimes go Tory. And then, of course, lots of swing seats in the lower mainland of British Columbia.
Now, the last time we talked, you had talked about a collapse of the NDP vote and at least a diminution, if not a collapse of the Bloc vote. Where are you on those two parameters right now?
We're still seeing that. So we have some of the best numbers for the NDP of all the pollsters, and even we have the NDP down 4 or 5 points from their worst result in the last 20 years. So now, all that being said, you'll remember in Ontario, not just 2 months ago, that the NDP were polling very poorly, but still won more seats than the Liberals, even though they were a good 10 points behind the Liberals across the province as a whole. So, we can't rule out that even though the overall numbers for the NDP is down, that they may be able to hold on to a disproportionate number of their incumbent seats. That's a possibility, but it looks pretty difficult for them.
Well, I think
Then,
that's the case of a very efficient vote where the NDP are going to win seats. They're going to get a lot of people to come out to vote, and then their poll numbers overall go down because in seats where they're not winning, they tend to strategically vote for the Liberals.
but the problem that they've got is that if we ask people who feel closest to the NDP to agree or disagree that this is a two-horse race between the Conservatives and the Liberals, the NDP don't really have a chance. A majority agree with that statement. And I'm still doing the work on that now, but I'm pretty sure that's going to be considerably higher than we've seen in previous elections. So the whole issue of who's going to get up there and duke it out with Trump squeezes the NDP out of that consideration.
I think it does, but I've spoken to a lot of NDP people that really do vote strategically. That if the Conservatives are in second place in their riding, if they vote Liberal, it actually is a benefit to the Conservatives,
Right,
and so they only will vote Liberal if they're in third place,
right,
and the Liberal can hopscotch over the Conservative to go into first.
right. Yeah, if they, so another way of looking at that is that, the NDP have a good argument to make in a seat they've already won, that if you leave the NDP, you actually may hand it to the Conservatives.
Exactly.
And, that's not a perfect scenario for the NDP because it's true that more New Democrats will go to the Liberals than go to the Conservatives. But over the past decade, the Conservatives have done better and better at getting second choice NDP support.
Really?
Well, and it really, I mean, you've seen that with Ford. He didn't really pick up this campaign, but in the previous campaign he did, and he held on to what he took this time. And you've seen that over time, and it really comes down to hard hats versus white collar. Right. So there's a part of the NDP that's university educated, working in public service, making, close to 100 grand, maybe more than 100 grand a year. Um, and those people are very concerned about equity and diversity and discrimination and redistribution. And then you've got the hard hat vote, people that work in construction and manufacturing, um, and they're about jobs, right? And so they're with the NDP if the issue is, um, for lack of a better word, the politics of envy, right? Who's going to pay taxes around here? Is it going to be my boss or is it going to be me? But if the issue is, are we going to have jobs or not? That voter can switch over to conservatives in a heartbeat. And, for a few people as old as you and I, they'll remember the swing reform NDP voters in the 1990s. And there were quite a few of them. And if you look at our value clusters, you'll see that there's a fairly significant group of voters that are what we call pay-as-you-go moderates who want strong government programs, but don't want to mortgage the future for it.
I've also been surprised at how many NDPers actually really have dislike and distrust for Liberals.
Yeah, and part of that is that they don't trust them. They look at the liberals as, um, well, in a positive way as pragmatists, and as a negative in a negative way as opportunists. And so they don't feel they can count on them. And so from time to time they'll have a sense of outrage at betrayals, that they'll feel that the liberals promise to do something and they won't, whereas they never would have had the illusion that the conservatives would do it. And very often we get we generate more dislike among people that we trusted who let us down than towards people we never trusted in the first place.
Really, that's interesting.
Well, honestly, we're having that experience collectively. I think we talked about it last time in terms of Donald Trump. So I think the best analogy for what we're going through as a country right now is the personal analogy is that you have a breakup with someone that you've been going with for years, and you've got a bunch of their stuff in your place, and you want to throw it all out on the window and then burn it in a bonfire on the front yard because you're just mad and you want them to hurt the way you hurt. And that sense of betrayal is very much driving reactions to Donald Trump right now.
Even though probably a lot of people never trusted him at all, but it's
Well, but they
that
trusted
was
the
the
United
relationship with the
States,
US. Yeah.
right? And if you think the last time he was in power, yes, he did some tariffs then, and he did some stuff that we weren't big fans of. But overall, the checks and balances of the United States stopped him from doing anything too disruptive. This time, he's just overturning the apple cart left, right, and center. And we're like, okay, you elected a crazy guy, but you have a responsibility to keep him in check. And right now, he just has such a stranglehold on the courts, on the Senate, and on the Congress that there's no restraint. I mean, these trade policies are delegated policies, right? Congress could take them back tomorrow,
But they don't have the
um,
guts.
but they're not. And for obvious reasons, that if you are a Republican and you're running in a primary, you have a very low chance of making it through the primary if the president wants to take you out.
Well, look at Mitt Romney, look at Liz Cheney, look at
Yeah,
who's the gentleman that was the other person on the January 6th commission that is out of
right.
a job.
But and they go over after all sorts. It doesn't have to be so directly opposite of Trump's interest for
Yeah.
the MAGA nation to say we're going to take him out.
What about the Bloc? How are the Bloc
Well, the
Quebecois
Bloc
doing?
are also really struggling. So the Bloc had the best opportunities to fight back against Carney of any of the parties. Carney made two really atrocious blunders in Quebec, and it wasn't because he didn't speak the language well. So the first blunder, there was a major event, back in the 80s, where there was a massacre of women students at a university campus by someone who just hated women. And that's become a real focal point of popular culture. And they still recognize the anniversary of that, celebrates the wrong word for it. Um, so that happened at the Polytechnic in Montreal. But and Carney as a candidate that was a student leader in the Polytechnic at that time. So does an event with her, and he does two things wrong. Number one, he gets her name wrong. Not the end of the world, but not good. But number two, he said that the massacre happened at Concordia, not the Polytechnic. Well, that is, that just says I have no idea what's going on. That's like saying Ken Dryden played for the Maple Leafs, right? Like, I mean, it's just he never played for the Maple Leafs, always played for the
Privilege.
Canadian.
Best
If
goalie for the Montreal Canadiens in all history, other than maybe
yeah,
Vachon.
absolutely. But it's like if you get that wrong, we know you don't know hockey, right? Well, if you get the massacre site wrong, we know you don't know Quebec. But then he did something arguably even worse, although that was very bad. He had a one-on-one at I think Radio Canada. All the leaders did, where the host interviewed them, and the last question was, "What do you think Quebecers are looking for? What are the hopes and dreams of Quebecers?" And he starts talking about distinct society. And the average person in Ontario might think, well, what's so bad about that? I mean, I remember when we talked about it in Meech Lake in the Charlottetown Accord. But honestly, that's the last time any serious francophone in Quebec took on that issue. And it was put to bed officially in around 2007, 2008. There was a motion that the Bloc moved that Harper agreed to recognize Quebec as a
It
nation.
was only because Ignatieff had said he would recognize, and Harper wanted
Right.
to beat Ignatieff to the punch.
Yeah. And so Michael Chong, you might recall, actually resigned as a minister over it. But that was the last time that there was any meaningful discussion about nation versus distinct society. So if you understand Quebec culture at all, you would never talk about distinct society, and he did. And so, that was a wide open opportunity for the Bloc to say, this guy just doesn't get us. We can't count on him. And then the Bloc had something that made French relevant. The U.S. Trade Commission filed a report on trade barriers and identified Quebec's French language protection as a trade barrier that should be targeted in negotiations. So, you put those three things together, there would have been a killer ad. There was a great debate moment. There were all sorts of things. And for whatever reason, the Bloc didn't put it all together. And so then, over the last 10 days, Carney started 10 days ago with a really popular talk show that's unique in Quebec. We don't have anything like it in Canada, called Tout le monde en parle, or the rest of Canada, where about 1 million viewers a week tune into this show, which is like sort of like The View, right? It's not really about where do you stand on the policies. It's like, are you witty? Are you charming? And Carney did okay. He didn't make any major social gaffes, and he held his own in the conversation. just like he did, for instance, on
Other than getting
the Daily
the
Show.
sound of poutine wrong or something like that.
Yeah, but people aren't worried. It's not about how he speaks French. That's a problem. But people are willing to forgive that if they think that he understands them but can't say the words properly. That's one thing. If he pronounces all the words perfectly but doesn't get them, that's a whole different thing. Um, so bottom line though is that he did well until Le Mans en Parle. He did generally the commentators are scoring him as doing at least as well as Pierre Poilievre, who has much better French. And then he didn't really get beat up too bad in the French language debate.
Well, it sounds like it's a bit of a change in popular vote, but maybe still not a massive change in the seat count. So
No,
we're going to
no,
take,
but for in Quebec it will be.
no, I mean,
So
from the last time we chatted.
no, it hasn't changed dramatically since then. If anything, though, we may, it's now a lot more plausible to talk about a liberal minority as opposed to a liberal majority.
Really?
Well, most of the seat models are still saying that the liberals are going to make a majority by at least 10 seats. Um, but 10 seats is not a lot of seats.
There's not.
Um, and just the NDP doing well in their incumbent seats might be enough to hold the Liberals to a minority. And if the Conservatives are doing better than we know in turnout, which is possible, we had a record turnout in the advanced polls. And the big issue for the Conservatives is most polls are saying they do better with young people than older people. And traditionally, if you have a low turnout, it means lots of old people, not many young people. As turnout goes up, you get a bigger share of young people in the turnout, and all else being equal, that ought to help the conservatives. Um, we've also seen, when's the last time the main lead of the news in Canada was Donald Trump, right? We're probably talking 10 days ago, right? And every day that we're not hearing about Donald Trump is a day we're experiencing high prices at the grocery store, problems with housing, concerns about crime. Just like everyday life works against the liberals. It drives time for a change. Every time Donald Trump is in the news saying something crazy about us, that helps the liberals. So
We got to
as
get that CBC reporter to ask the press secretary in the White House again.
yeah,
Does
and
Trump
that
still
would
think Canada should be the 51st state?
right, and that's a pretty problematic issue, right? So you've got a news outlet that the federal conservatives are saying they're going to cut the funding to, arguably creating a news story that favors the liberals. And it did for a cycle, but that's probably the last time we heard anything about Trump. And that's not anywhere near as direct. Now the positive, this is a bad positive, but the thing that's going on that helps keep Trump front and center, particularly in Ontario, is that tariffs are actually causing economic impacts now, right? So there are anyone that's associated with a car plant, either working there directly, having a family member that works there, providing a service or supply, just running a diner outside the gates that's feeding the workers going in, going out. Um, all those people are now, they're very concerned. There's one day to another, there's new announcements about what's happening on in those jobs. Same thing's true of steel workers. The tariffs on steel are real in places like Sault Ste. Marie and Hamilton. Again, there are real people that have real fear and actually potentially getting laid off. Um, so
Well, and
that's
I think
and
it's impacting businessmen, business people, day in and day out. I just today negotiated two contracts where people are, adding in new clauses that insulate them from tariffs and in contracting out for construction. People
yeah,
are saying we're scrambling to try to secure all of our goods before reciprocal tariffs get put in place, and we
yeah.
think they're going to happen right after April 28th. So I think day in and day out, people are becoming more aware of what's going on in the risk. And
Well,
this, this rule about the de minimis going away in the United States for DHL and FedEx and other Perlator, etc. You know, people are going to be ordering their Temu and their what's that Chinese fashion brand stuff real quick so they
Yeah,
can get it in fastly. Anyway, we got to take a break for a message.
let's do
I'm going
it.
to come back in 2 minutes and ask Greg Lyle, what do you think's caused this? Is it the debates? Is it just this Trump factor? Is it ads? What's caused this change? Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We got Greg Lyle with us tonight again, talking about where we are in polls. And Greg, you've got polls that are a little bit different than what I've sort of seen on social media and in the newspapers. Most of the polls I've seen have still got, what, a 5-6 point difference between the Liberals and the Conservatives. They got the Conservatives at, 37, 38, and the Liberals at 43 and maybe even 44, 45. Why are you so much closer, and why do you think it's happened over the course of just the last week?
Um, well, I would say that in the past 24 hours, there are more polls like the ones I'm discussing. So Main Street, for example, actually had the Tories ahead for a while. The last Main Street release was neck and neck. And I believe I saw a Leger poll that was 2 or 3 points. So I think you're going to see more of that. And honestly, it just makes sense when you understand that what pulled the Liberals ahead was the Trump thing. When we ask people what party shares your values, what party cares about you, the answer to that is still conservatives over liberals, right? So the liberals are winning on strong leadership and confidence, but again, they're not way ahead of the conservatives. The conservatives are very competitive on this. So it's really, if they go another, so the Pope has passed away, and there's a bunch of people going to the funeral, including the president. And so there's a pretty good chance that for the next 3 or 4 days, President Trump won't even think about Canada, let alone say something about it. That's a gift to the opposition parties. Um, Also, if you look at the conservative ads, you'll see that they're not showing Poilievre anymore. And they're focused overwhelmingly on time for a change, on pocketbook issues, and the record of the Liberal government. All that makes a lot of sense, and all that will likely
But with
add
old white
to the.
guys.
That's their target group. They are disproportionately losing among that group. That is bedrock conservative territory. It was for Harper, it was for Mulroney, it was for Ford, it should be for Poilievre. And so, they're the young people that live affordability every day don't need the ad. The ad is targeting people that are going to show up to vote one way or the other and are leaning Carney. Because if you look at that whole anger towards Trump, if you look at towards buy Canadian behavior, it's a 55 plus story. Under 55, people are a lot less concerned about it. And again, if you look at standard of living, how do I feel about my standard of living? People over 60 are far happier with their standard of living than people under 60. And literally, it's that, sort of the line between boomers and Gen X's.
That's fascinating. What was the result of the debate? Anything?
Both Carney and Poilievre did well in our poll. Both of them were seen as beating expectations by a similar amount. Both of them were seen as winning by similar numbers. The main thing that was important is that Carney did better than Poilievre, a lot better than Poilievre among New Democrats. And so that bleed from the New Democrats to the Liberals got reinforced by the debates. But overall, the main thing about the debates, I think, is not the sort of immediate tactical feedback on who won or lost. Again, it looks like a draw. I think the biggest thing about the debate was that it focused the conversation on things other than Trump, right? They talked about all sorts of other issues. And then on the weekend news was dominated by the liberal platform, which was not a Trump thing. It was about all sorts of other things. How big are the deficits? What programs are they supporting? What programs will they have to cut? And so again, the discussion, the political discussion, was not about Trump. It was about other stuff. And, if you listen to pundits, some of the liberals are pulling their hair out over why are the liberals spending time talking about anything other than Trump? That they would have been better off saying, showing how they're going to fund their Trump agenda and ignore everything else and just, take the heat for not having the other stuff and keep the focus on Trump.
So given that result, was the Conservative strategy to delay until just recently the release of their platform the right strategy?
Yeah, they really needed, it wasn't really hurting them in anything we saw. Um, and it would likely just get in the way. It's very rare that, so you've taken all your best announcements and you broke them out in earlier days, right? Now you're summing them all up. And the main story about the platform is always how much is it going to cost and how are you going to pay for it? And so for conservatives, that always raises questions about where they're going to find cuts. For liberals, that always raises questions about the deficit and
What's the
taxes.
deficit going to be?
Yeah.
And so you don't think the debate changed things. And so it really is just,
Well, I'll tell you one thing it did is that um, generally I don't think it did, but it kept Poilievre in the race, right? He was seen as competitive to Carney. There were very few moments in that debate where Poilievre sounded like Trump, right? That's a really important thing.
which is very
And
different than the way he sounds in his rallies. So he was almost a different person on stage at the debate versus on stage at the rallies.
yeah, and it's not a new Poilievre. Like if you go back and look at Poilievre's long videos in the 2017, 2018 when he's finance critic, that's what he sounded like. He was, focused on the issues. He wasn't a name caller. He didn't use superlatives. And, where he got in trouble in the debate was when he was doing stuff like talking about his rally sizes, right? That was very unfortunate.
That's interesting. I think about the debates between Harper and Trudeau. There, it wasn't win versus lose. It was how you did versus expectations. And I guess I would have thought the expectations for Carney were low given his lack of experience. But
Well,
you're
they
saying that
probably
really,
were, but all that being said, so we asked we probe the leaders in two different ways. One is we say, did they do better than your expectation, worse, or the same as your expectation? And then we ask who won. So you could imagine that you could beat your expectations but still lose, right? That wasn't the case here. Both Carney and Poilievre were seen on balance to do as well as expected or better than expected. And it's basically a statistical tie as to who won.
now yesterday when
But I'll tell you who
Trump
lost. The loser in that was Singh.
really,
So if you ask people, did he do better or worse than you expected? He was the only leader that was in negative territory, where
why?
more
Because of
people,
all the interruptions?
yeah. And then when we asked who the winner was, he did very poorly, and he didn't do very well among partisan New Democrats. Carney, I think Carney actually beat him. If I look at it, I'd have to look at it again, but
Well, what I
did
understand is he's at
disproportionately
risk of
well.
losing his own riding. Do you think that's the case?
Yeah, I think that's 100% true. I mean, if you look at how far down they are, he only won that riding by 10% in the last election. And the liberals have a lot of momentum behind them. So it could be pretty problematic for him.
So Monday of this week, when Donald Trump threatened to fire the governor of the Fed, the stock market was down over 1,000 points, and I thought it was going to be big news, particularly given that Poilievre had similarly said he thought that the governor of the Bank of Canada should be fired and that he should have the right to control who the governor of the Bank of Canada was. But because the Pope died, all the news was on the death of the Pope. And it wasn't
Yeah.
on, even though the stock market was down and they had the little ticker in the corner of the screen all day long about how bad the stock market was doing, it was not news, even though it was one of the worst days in the stock market in history.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. I don't personally think that issue plays that badly for Poilievre. I think it would have played badly in that case if it was another example of Poilievre sounding like Trump. But I think the average Canadian really has no idea how the Bank of Canada works, couldn't explain to you the difference between monetary policy and fiscal policy, and really doesn't understand the consequences of that. And what Poilievre's point would be, you know, they work for you, not for the elites. And if they're not going to give you the affordability you deserve, I'm going to get rid of them and put in someone who will. And lots of people are going to say that's great, even if that's
You know, it's
other people would
amazing that
argue
this
that's a silly
policy in
statement.
the United States that creates 1,000 point decline. You're saying people in Canada, it's comparable to this notwithstanding clause issue because, in the United States, they're talking about a constitutional crisis because effectively what Trump is doing is disagreeing with what the Supreme Court is saying on some issues. And that's what Poilievre is saying is he has the right to override what the Supreme Court said.
Well, but I think again, and we haven't specifically pulled on that in the election, but my past experience has been, if you have an example of someone that got out on bail and then committed a heinous crime, and you say, we're going to pass a law and we're going to make sure that soft judges can't, block this action of keeping dangerous people in jail where they belong, I think that's a win. I don't think he's going to lose on that. Even if they don't fully understand the whole issue of the Charter of Rights and the notwithstanding clause, I think it might get more complicated for him if people learn more about the importance of an independent fiscal policy. But they're not going to learn that in the campaign. I mean, in one regard, Kim Campbell was right. Right? Elections are a bad time to talk about
Well, and
policy.
I think Carney tried to raise this notwithstanding clause issue, and it didn't work. It
No, it's
was
a
too
big liberal
difficult to.
thing. Like the inside the Beltway liberals are outraged by this, right? Because it goes back to their view of their party, and they view repatriating the Constitution and entrenching the Charter of Rights as part of that process as a really key Canadian accomplishment. Outside those circles, people like it, right? People like the idea that there's a Charter of Rights. Uh, but they don't really understand it or understand the ins and outs, and they don't really understand the notwithstanding clause.
So, what's going to happen? We're going to have to take a break and come back in 2 minutes with Greg Lyle talking about where the polls stand. Stay with us, everyone. Back in two. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We're chatting tonight with Greg Lyle, a pollster, talking about his current polls that are coming out, and he's actually got the polls very close, almost neck and neck, and thinking that there's a chance that the Conservatives could actually win the popular vote, but the Liberals could win the most seats. And he's saying it could be a minority Liberal government, even though up until recently, most of the pollsters have been saying a majority Liberal government. Let's switch to the regions if we could, Greg. Like probably lots of us, I have family across the country, and so I spent Sunday chatting with family members across the country, and my brother in Atlantic Canada saying that Atlantic Canada could go almost solid Liberal. My brother in Edmonton said that the Liberals could win in Edmonton and in Calgary quite a number of seats. And my sister in Ottawa said that Poilievre could lose his own riding. So what's happening? Are any of those guesstimates true?
I think the idea that Poilievre would lose his seat is unlikely. We had um, you can't underestimate the impact of the convoy locally in Ottawa, but in Poilievre's seat, it didn't have any direct impact. Um, so it's an outline possibility, but that seat he won by a big margin, and under the boundary changes, they gave up some liberal pockets and picked up more conservative pockets. So it would be a big surprise for him to lose that seat. I don't think that's likely. But the important thing for your listeners to understand, and we're reminded of this every election, but then we forget between elections, is that we don't actually count votes to figure out who wins the election. We count seats, right? We count votes within seats. And so it's not the votes don't matter, but you can win the popular vote as the Conservatives did in both the last two elections and lose the overall election quite handily because you didn't have the votes in the right seats. And so if we look across the country, we're seeing very different dynamics. So, you look at Atlantic Canada, and all the polls agree that the Liberals are doing better than ever in Atlantic Canada, and that the Conservatives are on the defensive to hold the seats they've got. If we look at Quebec, there are pockets of Quebec. So there's a pocket around Quebec City that's been Tory for a number of years now, likely to continue to be Tory. Um, the If the Bloc really fell apart, then the Liberals might be able to get ahead, or if the Liberals really fell apart, the Bloc might be able to get ahead. But so long as the Bloc and the Liberals are both generally competitive, the Conservatives should be able to hold on to those seats. Um, but within Quebec, there's sort of there's three other worlds. One is the island of Montreal, which has what are called allophone and anglophone seats where there are lots of people for whom French is not their first tongue. And those seats have been historically very liberal and continue to be. But then there's the Montreal suburbs and what's called the regions of Quebec, the area outside of Quebec City and Montreal. So the regions have a blue streak. So there's a tradition, as sort of conservative nationalist tradition in Quebec that is a more rural tradition and is where parties like the CAQ get their support from. And even though the Bloc is a fairly left-wing party, on the nationalist side of things, it tends to do very well outside of Quebec City and Montreal. And that remains their relative strength in Quebec. Where the Liberals are doing better is in the suburbs of Montreal. They're still gaining ground in the regions, but those suburbs of Montreal. So when you're watching on election night, if you see a seat that's from Laval or, someplace like that, and you see that going Bloc, that's a big deal because that seat could have gone Liberal. And if it does go Liberal, it's going to contribute to the Liberals coming into Ontario in a good position. As it stands right now, it would not be at all surprising to see the Liberals come into Ontario with 70 or more seats. They could even have 80 seats. And if they're already at 80 seats and the Conservatives are at 20, so there's already a 60 seat lead. And then you hit Ontario. And as it stands right now, even if it's even in Ontario, the Liberals will likely win more seats than the Conservatives because of that vote efficiency thing. So it's quite possible that even on a good night for the Conservatives, they'll fall further behind as they come out of Ontario. So then they do very well in the prairies, but the prairies aren't all grain farmers, right? So if you go to Winnipeg, you're talking about 600,000 person city that has a history of voting Liberal and likely will strongly vote Liberal. There may only be two Conservative seats in that city. And then you go into Saskatchewan. So no one right now is saying that any Saskatchewan seat other than the North is going to go any way other than Conservative. But bear in mind provincially that the provincial Conservative equivalent, the Saskatchewan Party, won only one seat out of all the seats in Regina and Saskatoon. So that's something I've got my eye on. Will the Liberals or NDP, but in this case, probably the Liberals, be able to chip away then? Then you get to Calgary and Edmonton. So Ontario listeners may not be aware, but the nickname for Edmonton in Alberta politics is Redmonton because it has been the heart of NDP and Liberal votes. And McClellan came from Edmonton. The NDP provincially usually win most of the seats in Edmonton. So Edmonton, it would not at all be surprising to see a couple of Liberal seats. But even in Calgary, there is a downtown seat that's very likely to go Liberal. The northwest of Calgary is very ethnically diverse. It's a lot like Milton or Scarborough or Mississauga in Ontario. Um, and that's an area that provincially, the Conservatives have had a hard time winning, and New Democrats have been winning seats in the last couple elections. So that's another area that could go Liberal. And then by the time you get into BC, um, the NDP collapse could give the Liberals some new seats in Victoria, and particularly downtown Vancouver and the Burnaby area. Um, the way they're going right now, the NDP collapse pushes them ahead in swing seats in Vancouver suburbs, places like Surrey or the North Shore or the Coquitlam's. And then even the way things are shaping up now, you could imagine the Liberals winning seats like Kelowna Centre, I think it's called that now, um, and maybe even a couple of other urban seats in the interior. So as we go across the country and we look pocket by pocket, we see places that are not normally considered to be good positions for the Liberals, um, in part because of the collapse of the NDP, looking much better than they have in the past.
Most of our listeners are going to be in the Peel area,
Right.
905. Tell me what you think is going to happen in Peel. Usually people think that sort of Ontario goes the way that Peel goes and Canada
Right.
goes the way that Peel goes. Right now,
Appeal is
the Liberals,
complicated. Right? So if you look at the Mississaugas have a strong um, Muslim presence, which is very anti-conservative. And so now they have an excuse to go home. Those seats, those Mississauga seats, are sort of the first place you expect to see the Liberals do well when you look at
but almost
Peel.
all of them, I think all of them went conservative provincially.
Right. But in the last Fed, we've seen this now for two election cycles. The Conservatives win them provincially and the Liberals win them federally. The Conservatives hope to win them federally, right? But they're not able to pull it together. You look at Brampton, Brampton has been good to the NDP in the past, but it probably won't be this time. It's probably going to go Liberal. You look at Oakville, that's one of the better shots for the Conservatives. But if you think about our value clusters,
The former Minister of Defense, Anita Amand, is in Oakville, and she's got very high name recognition.
right, and plus Oakville, so I belong to, from time to time, I belong to a group called the Toronto Association of Business Economists. And the single highest concentration of economists is Oakville, if you look at the membership list. So Oakville is filled with what we call business liberals, people that believe in free enterprise, who believe profit delivers is the best way to incent behavior, but who believe the government should be interventionist, roll up its sleeves and get involved in the economy. But nonetheless, because it has that sort of free enterprise bent, because it has very high social economic status, it's if the Tories are going to win anywhere, if the Tories are going to win government, they pretty much have to win Oakville,
And Milton.
right? And then Milton and Halton Hills and moving up that way, Caledon, those are all seats that really have to go conservative. And if you think about them as it's sort of like car culture, right? So if you can take ethnicity out of the picture, if you can't live without your car, it ought to go conservative.
What about Ajax, Oshawa, Durham region?
So
That
those
has gone
areas will go
conservative in the
conservative
past.
before the West. So the east part of the GTA has always been the first place to go. Flaherty, places like, politicians like that have
Yeah.
come out of there. Um, Ajax a little less so. Oshawa has a tradition of a three-way fight with the NDP collapsing. That may help the Liberals with Oshawa. So, but Durham should stay pretty conservative.
This is fascinating. Really, thank you for joining us. We're going to take a final break and come back with some concluding comments with Greg Lyle in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We've been chatting with Greg Lyle, founder and president of Innovative Research Group Inc., who is just finishing tabulating his last polls, and he's got the election neck and neck, which is kind of surprising. Greg, I got a couple of final questions to ask you. I think first question is, Given what you've described, particularly if Jagmeet Singh either loses or come close to losing his own riding, is the NDP dead?
So the NDP is not dead, although they're going to do some serious soul searching. So the issue right now is that the Liberals have recentered themselves on the center right, not the center left. And there is lots of populist anger coming from the left. That anger needs a voice. And it's not really comfortable with the conservatives. It wants a Bernie Sanders. And so the opportunity for the NDP, if they find a Bernie Sanders voice, is very big.
I got to tell you, I was most impressed with Karina Gold during the leadership. I think she was an NDP, or she should have maybe switched to the NDP.
Well, and Karina's a really good example. So one of the questions that I think everyone has is what will Carney's policies be in government compared to in the election? So he says he wants to build everything. He wants to build a lot more of everything a lot faster. Very hard to do that with policies like the carbon cap emissions or emissions cap and the we can't remember what the initials stand for, but the IAA, the Federal Impact Assessment Act, that is,
Build no new pipelines act, according to the
yeah, well,
conservatives.
that's what the Tories call it. It is practically a very difficult process to navigate. What's happening in BC is that they have their own laws like that. They're just exempting them. So they announced 18 projects that actually add up to more than 18 um, that they're just exempting from their process in order to get them built quicker. So they didn't get rid of the act; they just ignored the act. And the federal Liberals may do a similar thing. As they start doing that work, if they start doing more incentives to attract investment to Canada, which would mean lower taxes probably for businesses, or if they start thinking about marginal tax rates to, like if you're a research scientist with Google, you get paid more in the States, and depending where you are in the States, you can keep considerably more of your income, and house prices are less. And so, in the war for talent globally to be competitive in things like artificial intelligence, we have some serious issues to do. Well, if Carney's very familiar with all that. So, if Carney decides to compete at that level, that's going to leave some people on the center left pretty upset.
So keeping his caucus together, keeping his support is going to be key.
Yeah, it'd be easier to keep the caucus together than it will be to keep the
Progressives.
voters happy. But if
Yeah.
you are a entrepreneurial, political entrepreneur, right, and you look around at where the opportunities are, you might think that maybe the opportunity is with the NDP. Although honestly, I think, and but that was an odd thing. He left
Liberals
Karina
like
Gold
power.
out of the cabinet,
Yeah.
right? Like that was a big surprise. Here he had this very clear, very distinct young center left voice who ran for the leadership and didn't get many votes, but got a lot of accolades. Got left out of cabinet. That was quite a bizarre.
I was surprised by that. So Warren Kinsella posted that if the Conservatives had kept Aaron O'Toole or had elect Jean Charest, they would be winning the election today, because he thought that Poilievre went too far to the right and appealed too much to the anti-vaxxer Trump-like crowd. What do you think? Is the Conservative Party destined to never win if it goes to the right the way Poilievre has?
They would really need the Liberals to mess up for them to win. Um, so the again the electorate is very diverse, right? And the number of people that share conservative values, if you define them with fiscal conservatism and those sorts of things, it's only about 25% of the electorate, and you can't win with that. You have to get moderates, either business liberals or pay-as-you-go moderates, or the way we describe them, um, to support the party in order to win. And this campaign didn't seem to understand that. They were very focused on appealing to a narrow slice of their base, not even their whole base, but they focused primarily on populist conservatives. That helped them raise a lot of money. Um, but
Get a
and
lot of
it
people out to
gets
rallies. Get a lot
yeah,
of
it gets good turnout for rallies, but it doesn't build it's not a big enough tent if you've got an effective big tent party in the center, which at the moment we
But
do.
yet at 39, I don't know what you've got them at. If you got them neck and neck, you probably got them at 40%. But at, anywhere 38, 39, 40%, that's really good numbers for the Conservatives.
Look,
That's
they're
usually
going to,
majority victory.
yeah, but you're going to get a situation where the Conservatives may have the highest share of the vote they've had since the 1980s
And
and
lose.
win fewer seats than they won last time around. Because the
Because you've
liberal,
united the left, just like they united the right. The
right,
the left is effectively uniting, not because they're actually uniting, but because people are voting strategically.
right, but this isn't a theoretical exercise. This is an exercise. This is political marketing in the real world. And none of this happened like overnight. We had numbers as early as November saying that among people afraid of Donald Trump, uh, that Justin Trudeau was favored over Pierre Poilievre as best able to handle Trump. So if as damaged as he was, Trudeau could beat Poilievre among people afraid of Trump, surely they must have taken seriously the potential that a new leader could do even better, as in fact he did. And he didn't start off better. If you go back to our tracking through January, February, and March, Poilievre and Carney were neck and neck. But we have a situation where about 45% of the electorate can't make up their minds about whether they approve or disapprove of the Tory position in dealing with Trump. And that has been true for 3 months. So the threats and the blank slates that the Conservatives had to fill have been clear for months, and they didn't do anything about it. So this isn't about a fundamental limit that there's just no way for the Conservatives to win. This is really, I mean, Corey Tonight, I think, had well put. This is a question of campaign malpractice. And I think where the Conservatives will have to look deeply is to decide, are they a party that wants to win and is willing to build a big enough coalition and do what it takes to build that coalition? Or are they a party that wants moral victories instead of electoral victories?
Greg Lyle, thanks so much. This has been really interesting. We look forward to seeing what happens next Monday night. And I guess the final message we got to give to everyone is Greg will pull you, but what really counts is Monday. And so, therefore, if you don't do anything else, please think about getting out and voting, exercising your franchise on election day. There's lots of people that fight damn hard to have an electoral system like we do. So take the extra couple of minutes on your way home from work and go out and vote. I think polls are open until 9:30, like it's late. So in Ontario at least. So get out and vote. Thanks, Greg. Appreciate it.
Thank you.